Good morning, church.
Good morning.
I'll be reading from the book of Mark, chapter 9, verses 30 to 32. Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know it, for he taught his disciples and said to them, "The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he is killed, he will rise the third day." But they did not understand his saying, and were afraid to ask him. This is the word of God.
Amen. Good morning. Please remain standing for the sermon. It's a joke about it, but what if I was serious? Would you? There's some people like, well, Ryan's asking, we're sitting down, we're not going to do whatever he says. But we don't expect to. We all have expectations. Expectations. We all have expectations of what happens when we come to church. Generally, and they're not bad or good. They are what they are. We expect to be able to sit during the sermon, especially with David's preaching, because that would be a workout. Hey, man, I'm preaching and he's here. There's no mercy now. It's over. But we have expectations. We expect that some of the songs we're going to stand up for, usually the invitation, we expect that. That's not bad. We have expectations about everything. When you go to the movies, you generally expect to enjoy the movie. You hope. Right? It's always a big letdown when you go to the movies and you walk out going, When you get popcorn at the movies, you expect it to be good. Amen. And not stale and old. You expect them to have butter. You just expect things. And that's normal. We all have expectations. And oftentimes the more important an event or a thing, the more expectations we have. Usually. For small things, we don't have many expectations, but for big things, we do. In the first century, the Jews were waiting for the Messiah. This whole thing was sort of inspired by a conversation I had with Alan last week while watching the Super Bowl. Shows you how much I cared about football. We were talking about first century Jewish messianic expectations. Woo! Yeah. Go whatever team won, I don't know. I believe it was the Chiefs. But it was inspired by this because talking about it and just the idea that normally when we think about the first century and the Jews and what they wanted in the Messiah, they were waiting for the Messiah. The Messiah is coming. He's going to arrive sometime, hopefully soon, and what is he going to look like? What is he going to do? What are the things? And how we normally have this kind of picture in our heads that they were expecting a military leader to come and fight the Romans. And while that is true, something I realized is, in studying this kind of stuff, there was no consensus at all in the first century Jewish world. They were as diverse in opinion as any large religious organization that was spread out across multiple continents. So just think of people who identify as Christians and how much we agree on everything. And same with them. They had a whole bunch of different pictures of the Messiah. Some groups wanted one thing, some groups were expecting another thing. They were all waiting on it. And so today we're going to look at three groups, briefly, and what they were waiting on, what they were expecting. Because it's kind of interesting. So the first group is the Zealots. A zealot was basically, they were the freedom fighters. The Roman Empire had taken over Judea and their land, and they wanted to kick them out. Zealots lived their lives in the caves. They hunted Roman soldiers, hunted Roman politicians. They killed tax collectors. They were, in our parlance, terrorists. These were the people the Romans liked to crucify. Barabbas, who was, when Pilate was releasing a prisoner, Jesus or Barabbas was charged with murder of Romans and trying to start an insurrection. He was a zealot. The two thieves, the translation of thief isn't really right. The actual term is insurrectionaries or revolutionaries that were crucified with Jesus. were zealots. They were trying to overthrow the government. And these guys were waiting for the Messiah because they thought, all right, when the Messiah gets here, it's going to be go time. And that was the technical term they used, go time. That's right. Because they knew when he comes, he's going to be a military guy. He's going to come in riding on the horse. He's going to have sword in hand, and he is going to kick the Romans' booties all the way back to Italy and establish Judea as a superpower, and will be awesome. That's what they thought. That's what they were looking for. And it was a pretty popular sentiment. This is why at the feeding of the 5,000, they wanted to make him king, because they sat down in groups of 5s and 10s and 20s, little like military units, and all of a sudden they found out, hey, with this guy, we don't have to worry about food or supplies. He could probably make us weapons. He's the one. And Jesus slipped away. It's like, no, not like that. So we have the zealots. We also have a group we're very familiar with, the Pharisees. Now, to the Pharisees, we give the Pharisees a hard time, and they deserve a hard time. Jesus gives them a hard time. But to their credit, the one good thing I will say about them is they are trying. They're not trying very well or in the right way, but they are trying to follow God. They're doing it all wrong, but they're trying. They had a very different view of what the Messiah was going to be. See, the Pharisees were, above anything else, purists. They wanted to follow the law perfectly. And they believed that every other Jew should follow the law as perfectly as they do. And so they were very strict. And they're also not that big of a group. They're about 10% of the overall Jewish world at that time. That's a significant portion, but they're not that big. But the thing, what they thought the Messiah would do, they thought the Messiah would come back and clean the temple out, make it pure again, make Israel holy again, make everyone pure, make everyone obedient to God perfectly again. That's what they thought. This is why when people were saying, well, this Jesus guy's coming, Barb, Jesus, he might be the Messiah, the Pharisees would come out and watch him. And all their questions, if you ever notice, all their questions have to do with the law. Why are you breaking it? You can't be the Messiah if you're breaking the law. That doesn't make sense. You picked a thing of grain on the Sabbath. How dare you, sir? I mean, they lost their minds. Because in their mind, the Messiah was there to restore obedience to God. And if this Jesus guy is breaking the Sabbath in their views, now he really wasn't, and they like to add some extra rules into the mix to make everything just a little more pure, a little more holy than what God had done. Shows you a little bit of their attitude. But that's what they thought. And that's why Jesus confused them. Because he wasn't doing what they thought. He was eating with sinners, or people they called sinners. He ate with the tax collectors. He wasn't scared to talk to Gentiles. You know, those gross people that pretty much all of us are. They didn't like us. They went, See, the Pharisees were very concerned. If the Zealots were concerned about who their enemy was, the Pharisees were very concerned about who their friends were. They want to know who was on their team, who was clean, who was pure. They'd be like, Rick's okay. Dean, nuh-uh, no way. Get him out of here. But that's how they had the mentality. So when they were following Jesus and questioning him, they really want to know, is he on our team? Is he pure? And the thing is, he wasn't what they expected. So they got mad and they got angry and everything else. Now the third group is the Sadducees. And they're sad, you see. Yeah, I know. It's old. Because they didn't believe in the resurrection. These guys, though, first of all, they were a bigger group than the Pharisees. And these guys were the ones in control. They had the power. The temple, that was their territory. They ran it. They got a lot of money from running it. They were actually an interesting group, because when it came to the Messiah, they were more like, we're good. We have a good thing going with these Roman guys right now. We make a lot of money. People come from all over the empire to come give money to us and sacrifice at our temple, and we're good. We don't really want to mess with this. So Messiah, it's great. Because they knew something. They knew that when the Messiah showed up, nothing would ever be the same. He was going to mix everything up. He was going to turn the world upside down. They knew that. And they, being at the top of the world, really didn't want it turned upside down. They liked it. It's in most of the gospel stories, the Sadducees aren't really that mad at Jesus until he does the whole cleansing the temple thing, when he walks in and shoos out the money changers and flips the tables. That's when they're like, okay, this guy's got to go. He's a problem for us. He's costing us money. They were comfortable where they were. They were fine. They weren't as concerned about being holy as the Pharisees were, as long as the Jews of the world kept coming to the temple, kept paying the money. They were fine. And they didn't really want the Messiah. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Ryan, that's really fascinating and interesting, but how in the world does this help us right now? Well, the truth is, we do the exact same thing. We all have different expectations about who Jesus is and what he's going to do and what he says. Have you ever noticed that everything's now a controversy, so it's not that hard, but pick a controversy of the last week and go to Facebook and look at both friends of the political aisle and note how the friends who are Democrats, Jesus seems to really agree with them, and the Republicans, how Jesus really also seems to agree with them. Both of them will pull out Jesus and say, aha, he's on our team. It's always strange how Jesus always seems to look a lot like me. He thinks like me. He has my opinions. He shares my personality type. Everything. It's great. We all do this. We all have this expectation. Much like they did. Now here's the interesting thing. All those Jewish groups, you know what they all had in common? They were all right. And they were all wrong. We always focus on how they missed the point and how they missed the mark, but we often don't focus on the fact that they all had something right, something different right. They all read the same Bible, so they would be able to pull out something right, miss everything else, sure, but they got something. The Zealots knew that the Messiah would come and deal with their enemies. They knew that. And guess what? He did. They were right. What did they get wrong? Who the enemy was. They were thinking the Roman Empire. They were thinking small scale. The Messiah came, Jesus came, to deal with sin and death and the dark spiritual forces that were at war within the world. And zealots very much exist today. Now, typically, most Christians are not advocating the overthrow of the government. Last I checked. Maybe they are. I don't know. But today, you can know a zealot when you see one whenever they look at other people and they say, they're the enemy. If they look at the Democratic Party and say, they're the enemy, or the Republican Party and say, they're the enemy, or Muslims and say, they're the enemy, or atheists and say, they're the enemy, or the LGBTQ crowd and they say, they're the enemy, or any group of people you can imagine, and they say, they're the enemy. And what Jesus is in my life to do and wants me to do is beat them. I think we all know someone, probably in our lives, who that's kind of what it is. That's what their life is about. That's what they think Jesus is all about, is beating the other person. And it's not true. Paul tells us in Ephesians that our enemy is not flesh and blood. There is no human being on this planet who is your enemy. They are the mission. They're the goal. They're the ones we're trying to reach. The real enemy are the dark spiritual forces, the powers, the Satan, all that stuff, the forces of greed and corruption that people chosen and made by God are stuck in and wrapped up in. That's the enemy. We also have Pharisees. And again, credit to the Pharisees. They're trying, not trying very well, but they are trying. And now today we normally don't say Pharisee, we say the L word, we say they're a legalist. I think you might be a legalist. Oh no. And that's something we talk about a lot. We don't want to be a legalist. So that's true. You don't want to be a legalist. But it's the same type of thing. Just like the Pharisees. They're not so much concerned about who the enemy is. They're concerned about who's on our team. Who can I trust? Who follows the rules like I do? See, Pharisees or legalists are all about holiness. They just take love and kind of put it back here and hide it. They want to be holy. They want to follow God. They want to obey God. Yes, great. Love others. We're going to put that over here and we'll get to it. Truth is, you can't do one without the other. It's not truly holiness if there's no love. Now, on the flip side of the legalists today, we do have Christians who do the opposite. Love everyone, accept everyone. Doesn't matter what they've done or who they are or what they're doing. They could be hurting someone, but love them. Holiness, we're not going to talk about that. Thing is, it's not really love unless it's holy, unless it calls someone to a standard, unless it calls someone to be what they need to be, which is a child of God, someone who loves Him. If you don't call someone to healing or call someone to righteousness or call someone to God, call someone out of sin, it's not really love. It's compassion on steroids. That's all it is. It's compassion, feeling for them. And compassion's a good thing. It helps us come to love. But we have Pharisees too. But then there's the group that I think most of us are. Sadducees. We're all sad, you see. I'm going to say it again. No one laughed that time. But that's true. You know what we are? When it comes to expecting Jesus and looking for Christ, see, the zealots look for Him and they want to find something that condemns their enemies. The Pharisees look and they want to find something that validates themselves and their friends. And the Sadducees, we don't really want to look. Because we know what happens when we look. We change. Things crumble around us. The whole world gets flipped. Jesus doesn't leave us in the same place. And a lot of us, we kind of like where we're at. We like where we're at. We're good. We're comfortable. And it can be hard to change. We all know this. So this last couple of days, I bought a new car. I don't have a toaster thing anymore. Yes, it's very exciting. It's a good change. It's a wonderful thing. And it's one of those, Would I be willing if Jesus said, okay, well, time to go back to the cube? Would you? Well, I hope so, yes. Now, I don't know if he would say that or not, but it's the willingness to say yes. The idea that when we get into the Scriptures, when we learn about Jesus, He's going to change us. And the Sadducees didn't want that. And the other thing the Sadducees were known for is they didn't believe in the resurrection. Now, most of us probably, sadly, also don't believe in the resurrection. We will say we do, but we live like we don't. We say we do, but live like we don't. We live like death is the scariest, finalist thing that could ever happen to us, when the whole point of the resurrection is that no, it's not. We live like this life is the only one that matters, that there's nothing else going to happen later, that if it's not in the here, if it's not right now, then it's not worth it. Well, that's just not true. What the Sadducees get right is they understand that when you encounter the Messiah, when you encounter Jesus, nothing stays the same. What they get wrong is that they don't want to encounter Jesus. They don't want to deal with that. And here's what all of them missing, and every other thing, because, again, there's more than 3 Jewish groups in the first century. There's literally hundreds. They all had different opinions, and every of the groups had subgroups, and you know how groups work. No one ever agreed on anything. I bet you we'd have 100 groups and opinions in this room if I asked the right questions. We would. But here's what they all missed. The one common thing they all missed, and I believe this is still the one common thing today we all miss, and that's the cross. In Matthew 16, Peter, talking to Jesus, gets it both incredibly right and incredibly wrong. In chapter 16, starting in verse 13, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And Jesus said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." He's right. And Jesus will say, "You're right. That's who I am." But if you jump down to verse 21, right in this, it's all the same story. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and then on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him and said, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But he turned to him and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind to the things of God, but on the things of man." Peter gets it right. He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Yes, great, good job. He's the first one to actually get it. And then when Jesus says, "All right, well, this is what that means," Peter's like, "No. No, wait, Jesus, come over here for a second. We need to talk about this whole thing, because no, that's not what happens. The Messiah, the Christ, he doesn't die." And that's what I think is true for all of us still. Whatever we want Jesus to be, the one we want to follow, we all seem to ignore that the place following Jesus leads is to right there, to the cross. To pick up your cross and follow me. And that cross, he says, pick up your cross, is not just whatever personal thing you're going through that week. It's to participate in his cross, in the bearing the shame and the sin and suffering of the world, so that they may know God and be saved. Pick it up and follow. For the zealots, that means recognizing the true enemy. It's not you or you or you. It may be Dean, but no, probably not. I always pick on Dean, and no one ever laughs because they're like, he's being really mean. But it's fine. He's much worse to me. It's true. But it's recognizing that we're not each other's enemies, and no one out there. It doesn't matter which political candidate runs for the Democrats, or Trump for the Republicans, or whoever else. They're not the enemy. It doesn't man, yes, there's going to be violence against Christians. But the thing we have to realize, the people committing that violence, Jesus died for them too. They're not the enemy. For the Pharisees, it means loving everyone, no matter what. It doesn't mean abandoning holiness and abandoning obedience. Of course it doesn't. But to pick up the cross is to want to take someone else's shame and hurt on you and help them carry it. And for the Sadducees, it means meeting Jesus, openly engaging with him, and letting yourself be changed, and realizing, you know what, comfort, not the best thing. So unless it's in God, unless it's in him, that I am at peace in God amidst whatever storm may come. And so today, as we go out from here, as we live our lives, the challenge is to meet Jesus. First of all, read the Bible. Do that anyway, not just because I say so, but because it says so, and it's a good thing. But encounter Christ. Look for him. Be willing to be challenged. Challenge your expectations. Because we'll go in there and we'll expect to find one thing or the other, and we may be right occasionally. All the other groups were right occasionally. But be willing to admit that Jesus is not on my team. I hope I'm on his. It's as the angel of the armies, the commander of the armies of the Lord said to Joshua, when Joshua came out for the battle of Jericho, and he asked him, whose side are you on? And the angel of the commander of the armies of the Lord looked at him and said, neither. He's on his side. Are we on his? So the challenge this week is to read Matthew 16. I know I just read part of it. You can read it again. It's great. And look at what it means for Jesus to be Jesus. And see where Peter gets it right. Learn from where Peter gets it wrong. But read it. That's your homework. I know. Homework. Gross. But if there's anything else you need today, we ask you to come as we stand and as we sing.
Everyone needs compassion. Oh, that's never failing.